Setsubun Battle. A short story by PJ Leonard. Part 3. Seiji looked wildly around. He looked around on the grass where the portal had been. He rushed back inside and scoured the house, looking for any hint, any idea of how to open that portal again. Had the Oni dropped some kind of key? Maybe there was a password he needed to say to open the portal again. But after slipping on the cracked beans scattered everywhere for the third time, he just lay there. Of course there was no key or password. The portal was gone. His family was gone. He would never see them again. Unless... He pulled himself back to his feet and walked into the kitchen. He opened the fridge and took out a shrink-wrapped pack, no bigger than a Swiss roll. Ehomaki. Seiji wrinkled his nose as he peeled off the plastic to reveal the roll of rice and vegetables wrapped in a sheet of seaweed. He hated eating ekomaki, but now wasn't the time for likes or dislikes. This was his only chance. It was a long shot, but he had no other ideas. Clutching the ehomaki in his hands, he returned to the front garden. Facing the place where the portal had once been, he held up the ehomaki like a telescope and started to eat in silence. Immediately, he felt ridiculous. His family were in trouble in some demon-filled dimension, and he was eating. Why did he think this would work? He thought all of this in silence, though, as he couldn't speak while eating the ehomaki. If he spoke, then it definitely wouldn't work. But he was already halfway through, and the garden was still in the night. He shivered as he swallowed a mouthful, feeling a tightness in his chest. Please, please. He held the last mouthful in his hand, feeling a drip of sweat running down his cheek despite the cold. It wasn't working. Of course it wasn't. Why would it? Why would eating a roll of rice, vegetables, and seaweed open up a portal to another dimension? As he was halfway tempted to throw the last mouthful on the ground as his stomach ached, he ate the last bit out of habit more than anything, and ran his now empty hands through his hair. What now? Tell the neighbours? Call the police? But even if they believe what had happened, surely nobody had a way to... Just as he swallowed the final mouthful of ehomaki, a blast of wind rocked the trees and made Seiji stagger sideways. With a snap like a whip, the portal opened again, drenching the grass in a red light like blood. Seiji felt as though a rope that had been getting tighter and tighter around his chest had been cut loose. He clenched his left fist and felt a wrinkle of plastic on his fingers. He looked down to see that the bag of beans was still in his hands, with only one bean left. One bean. How could he take on those demons again with just one bean? But before he could rush back into the house to scrape the used beans off of the floor, the portal began to shrink. Without thinking, he dashed forward and let through the portal before it could close again. He slipped and fell on what felt like ice. It was so dark that he couldn't see the floor he'd fallen on. But when he stretched out his hands to push himself up, Seiji thought the ground felt more like ice. Well, more like marble. "Who goes there?" came a familiar growl. Seiji looked up. 2 flaming torches were bobbing towards him, throwing just enough light onto the faces of who was holding them. 2 Oni. Seiji turned to run, but slammed into a wall almost immediately. Had the portal gone? The torches drew up close to him and threw flickering light on the wall, revealing that it was not a wall, but a big stone door. "You!" Seiji turned and had one glimpse of the half-shocked, half-furious faces of the red Oni and blue Oni before beefy hands grabbed him by the shoulders. He had a split second to pocket his final beam before they held his hands behind him.
"You've got a lot of nerve showing up here,"
said the blue Oni as they dragged him forward.
"Do you think you could come here and bother the demons in their own realm?"
"Think again, human," said the red Oni. "You have just landed yourself over to us. The Oni King will decide what to do with you." Seiji didn't fight back. He had nowhere to run, and even if he did, why would he? He was here to rescue his family after all. If they took him to his Oni King, then perhaps Mom, Dad and Yui weren't too far away. They rounded a corner, and a cold, damp breeze hit Seiji, bringing with it the stench of stale sweat. He coughed, and the Oni laughed. They descended deeper and deeper, and the darkness seemed to grow ever deeper until the path leveled out into a narrow tunnel lined with torches. The blue and red Oni placed their torches into spare brackets on the walls and marched Seiji roughly down the tunnel. They stopped at the end, and Seiji's knees grew weak at the sight below. A maze of an underground city stretched out below them, carved out roughly from the black, marble-like rock. Lights of blood red and ice blue glowed in the zigzag streets, swirling in the steam and smoke. And Oni. Oni were everywhere. As the blue and red Oni marched Seiji down the winding path and into the city, Seiji quickly lost count of them as they lined the streets to stare, point, and jeer at him. There were Oni of all shapes and sizes. Some were also red and blue, but some were green or grey. By the time they reached the centre of the city, it seemed as though all of the Oni who lived there had turned out to watch this trespassing human. Had Yui gone through this as well? She must have been terrified. They reached a long staircase lined with stone bowls of fire, and upwards they went. The crowd of Oni stayed where they were. Not even the demons of this city dared to follow them up here. The top of the stairs led into the biggest, thickest pillar of stone in the city. The pillar was carved into a castle, or at least someone's attempt at a castle, if they had only a hammer as a tool. Windows in the shapes of rough holes glowed, and the door at the top of the stairs wasn't so much a door as a sheet of dirty cloth flapping in the fetid wind. They reached the top of the stairs. Oni guards stood at either end of the door, holding spears. They took one look at Seiji and cracked a wide grin, baring teeth like a dog. They held the cloth aside and waved them in. Inside was even colder than outside. Seiji's breath rose in front of him in a plume of steam as he looked around. Even though there were torches lining the walls, it didn't light up the castle at all. The high roof couldn't even be seen, fading away into the darkness. The carpet under his feet was torn and old, and made a sickly squelching noise with every step he took. And Seiji's stomach lurched. Were those bones in the corner of the foyer? They reached the end of the foyer and stood before a massive door of rotting wood. The red Oni raised a fist and slammed on it once, so hard that Seiji thought the door would collapse. Silence. The boom of the knock echoed through the halls. Then, "Enter!" The door opened, and the red and blue Oni dragged him inside. The blue Oni pushed Seiji's head down so he stared at the floor.
"Show the proper respect to demon royalty, little human,"
he growled. Without warning, the red and blue Oni released him, and he crumpled to the floor. The floor rumbled underneath him. Was that an earthquake? Wait, not an earthquake. It was laughter. It shook the floor and stung his ears. He looked up. Sat atop a high throne made of skulls, the Oni king roared with laughter.
We meet at last,
he boomed.
Seiji, the last demon hunter.
End of part 3.